Recently, I appeared at the BJJ Globetrotters Spring Camp in Estonia. I taught a class on how to defend everything. The fundamental concept of this class was understanding control in Jiu-Jitsu. Control, very loosely defined, can be whoever exists between the other person's knee and elbows. So that can be side control, mount, guard. That would then follow the logic that if I can stop someone from entering that space, I can stop positions before they happen, so I don't need to study escapes, etc. The video then came out of this class and the feedback was brilliant. But then that made me think, what other positions do we have in Jiu-Jitsu that we could improve upon, that we could evolve, that we could make the current training standards redundant? This then made me want to make this series for YouTube on my channel called A Complete Lack of Technique, where each week I'm going to be looking at different positions of Jiu-Jitsu and opening a discussion of how we could maybe train them better. So the first episode I'm going to be covering is mount. In this episode I look at the basic posture which is taught for mount in most Jiu-Jitsu schools, where someone is lying on their back and someone else is sitting on their stomach and the person on the bottom has their arms in. Then every technique that we normally taught from mount is how to open up the elbows first, and then we can actually do our techniques. I believe this is inefficient. I believe that mount should be something that cements something we already have, instead of a new battle that we almost give up control and then we try and re-establish it by going for high mount, etc. So watch this episode, please give me your feedback. I will try and answer whatever questions I can for next week's episode. So yeah, here is my first episode on mount. The purpose of this episode is to look at mount and how we train mount. Could we train mount better? If you imagine the dominant positions we have in Jiu-Jitsu as they're taught now, side control, mount, rear mount, would they exist the way they are now if we didn't teach them that way to beginners on day one? My belief is probably not. Instead of having these battles where we take side control and we have a battle, we take mount and we have a battle, what if instead we were just taught to move ourselves as deep as we can into someone's armpits? I believe these positions would eventually appear, but maybe not in the format we currently have them. So for example, I'm not going to go for side control and naki now in a traditional sense. Instead, all I want in my head is how can I move into his armpits? So I start the guard pass, I find his armpit here, I find his armpit here. So that looked like a pretty effective side control, despite the fact it wasn't maybe a traditional looking side control. Now if you imagine mount as it's traditionally taught. I'm sitting on naki above his hips, his arms are in, and I have no control from his elbow to his armpits. Usually anytime this is taught, I need to open up this space first and get a high mount before I can attack him in any way. The problem with teaching mount like this is my feet are quite vulnerable to being re-guarded and his arms are exceptionally strong. He can frame on my hips and I'll lose the position entirely. So would it make more sense to teach it as I just want to move as much of my body as I can into his armpits as my form of control? That would mean going from our guard pass again. Open up the space, get my side control, take his arm, and then move to here. As you can see there, I open up that space straight from the guard pass. I just moved more of my body into that space. By the end, I had a perfect high mount. I think we should teach the end goals of these positions, guillotines, arm bars, and all the other submissions. But I don't think it should be from a dry mount position. I think we should have a fundamental understanding of what chokes and joint submissions are, and our only understanding of control should be how much I can move into someone's armpits. So the two submissions I get most whilst I'm training are mounted guillotines and mounted Americanas. Both are quite difficult to land if done from a dry mount position, where his arm's already in. So instead, I take what I want before I even get to mount. So for the mounted guillotine, I already had his neck. I then move into the space and I finish my guillotine. For the mounted Americana, from a traditionally taught perspective, it would look like this. Opening his arm, taking it and doing this. That would never work in normal sparring, and so it was instantly abandoned. Yet if it was taught like this, there, I already had a high mounted position on Naki, and that allowed me to go straight for that arm lock. The only thing we then have to change about how we study mount is how we keep the control once we've moved inside the armpits, where we move our feet and where we move our weight. But instead, this actually makes mount a bit more dynamic, is that instead of just trying to keep this pure position, I can now, as long as I have control of the armpits, move quite freely. I have control of the arm. If Naki starts to move and release his leg, I can keep this control. I can then come straight back from mount. I still have his arm and his armpit at my disposal. If he tries to re-guard my feet and actually catches me in quarter guard, I can pummel. I can still keep my mount. The benefit of also holding his arm is it makes it really hard for him to bridge. Is that my weight naturally comes off to one side. Go for that straight from Naki. Whilst I'm in this position, I can be bucked either way. My weight is quite equal, especially if someone quite strong. So bridge here and here. But what if my weight is already off to one side? What this adds for me is if he tries to bridge me this way whilst my head is over here, there's too much weight for him to lift. If he tries to bridge me this way, I have my head to base on. And I can also pull his arm up. To create any sort of meaningful bridge, he has to be able to pull his elbow and his shoulder underneath himself. If I've exposed his arm already, it makes it very difficult for him to bridge in those directions. And now if he tries to bridge far away from me, there's too much weight on that shoulder to lift in the first place. So it actually defeats most of the bridging that he can try. This allows him to keep flush with Naki's chest, keep the pressure on him, and limit his rotation. So going back to my video on how to defend everything, which you'll find in the description below. Fighting anyone of a reasonable skill level in Jiu-Jitsu means keeping the space between their knee and their armpit open. Which means if they want to defend, they're going to want to be closing that gap constantly. So once you manage to find it, I'm saying you should keep it open and ignore positions in general. Work your chokes, work your arm submissions, or work your entries into leg locks. But do it whilst keeping that gap open. Understand your end goal, and then work backwards through the controls. If you end up fighting someone of a decent skill level in Jiu-Jitsu, they are going to be trying their best to keep the gap between their elbow and their knee closed. So if you approach these as pitched battles of getting to mount and then having to reopen their arms, if they're of a decent level, you may never open that space again, you may end up in guard, and everything you work for has been lost. So instead, approach it as you know what you want, you know the chokes that you want, you know the arm submissions or leg submissions that you want. So once you've passed guard and you've opened up that space, practice keeping it open. And instead of looking at it as side control and mount, look at it as you're just moving more of your body into that space. Try this in rolling. Please comment on this video and let me know how you get on. Thank you for checking that episode out. Please like and subscribe. I will be doing new episodes every week. Next week I will be covering every guard pass ever. Until then, this is Chris Paines from Chris Paines BJJ.